Hi, I'm Dr. Zach Moore, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Let's start with, okay, your speaking tour. Both of you are getting ready to go down to Houston tomorrow morning and give a talk at
Galveston Oasis.
Yeah. So, yeah, what is this Oasis? How is it growing?
So,
for the people that don't know, and what do you two do? Is this like a full-time gig for you? I know you have full-time jobs, but are you doing this partially for a living, or
no,
not at all?
The project started. We're sitting in Rex's living room New Year's Day about 2.5 years ago, and we're drinking adult beverages and we're talking. And my story moving away from Christianity was a little bit different from his. I left a very fundamentalist denomination and never looked back. It was before the internet. It was before email. And it was before. The four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, and so it was before all of that, and I left and got through the angry atheist phase and kind of moved on with my life. I wasn't really involved in the free thought community. I wasn't involved in any groups. I wasn't looking for biblical research, and then I discovered Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens and Stinger and all of them, and started reading Bart Ehrman.
As a sort of an individual project.
Right, as an individual project, I found it fascinating, which got us into the prior conversation about why the Bible was interesting to us. When Rex and I met, we discovered we had read a huge survey of the same material and had very, very similar thinking on almost all things, except maybe bacon. But pretty much everything else we were in total agreement. So at some point, Rex points out to me, you left Christianity in a different mode, in a different way than I did, and there's a gap in your experience. He says to me, I bet we could go to church this weekend and find people who are not willing to say that they're in church for an afterlife. They might not even believe in an afterlife. And I said, you're full of shit. There's no way. Like, for me,
that's the main draw.
When I was a Christian, as a very fundamentalist Christian, that was the reason we were doing this. It was fire insurance.
To achieve heaven and
this life was a dress rehearsal for the next life.
That's exactly right. And it was difficult for me to imagine that there were Christians out there that wouldn't sign up for that. And it turns out there are, and really? We found them the first time we tried.
Yeah. So I learned this because I had when I read Thomas Paine that I mentioned a minute ago and had my own deconversion moment. I was literally 2 months into a brand new marriage, the mother of my daughter, to a Christian girl. She'd been raised Baptist. We had a church wedding, and 2 months later I was an atheist. So I obviously was looking for some kind of a toehold, and so I discovered first John Shelby Spong. Do you know John Shelby Spong? So he is a now retired Episcopal bishop. He still writes and speaks. Spong is so liberal, even though he still wears the priest collar. His definition of God is basically just reality, and his definition of church is basically just community, and his definition of Jesus is just wise elder brother, right? So he's basically taken these key concepts of Christianity and made them completely secular. But what that allows is, it allows people to say, well, I'm still in church and I still believe in God, but if you're using sort of the wink-wink Spong definition, it's really not any magical thinking at all.
Is that prevalent in Episcopalians and what others?
So I would say you will find that very, very progressive Christianity, and for me, the spectrum is not about the liturgy. I don't care about the liturgy. Some of them have, rock bands and video screens, and some of them have robes and candles and stuff. That doesn't matter, because at both ends of those spectrums, liturgically, you'll find a lot of magical thinking or very little magical thinking. So for me, the spectrum is how much magical thinking is there? And when I say magical thinking, I mean miracle, I mean the resurrection of Jesus, I mean afterlife, I mean the literal creation of the universe.
Young Earth Creation was apparently a very small, a very small demographic.
Well, it was small, but it's unfortunate.
But it's unfortunately
it's probably a quarter of America.
Though.
So if
it's convincing for people who don't know much about it.
So to me, the far right of the spectrum is like Assembly of God, Pentecostal, Seventh-day Adventist,
Yeah.
a lot of Southern Baptists. They are the full-blooded, the Bible's the literal Word
Speaking
of God.
in tongues. all
That's
that.
the fire insurance crowd that Owen is talking about. Every sermon is going to be about,
That's the
you
crowd.
want to go to heaven, you want to avoid hell, that's the reason we're here. That's why they keep the young people far better than the left does, because it's mandatory,
Do
right?
do those types invite you?
Yeah,
Oh, we don't wait for an invitation, we just go.
we go, right.
That's a different discussion.
Like tomorrow, when you're paying out of your own pocket for plane tickets to Houston, you're doing this all pro bono, and this is kind of an atheist type church, but but you go to actual believer type churches too.
Right, so
That's how the project started.
Sure. So there's two different kinds of events that we do. One kind of event is where we just, Owen and I, just the two of us, go to a Sunday school class and engage the believers. That's what we did.
Unannounced.
That's what we did for 2 years. It's got to be unannounced because we want the experience that anyone walking off the street would have. I don't want the red carpet experience. I don't want to know the official church position. I want to know what the believers
I have
really
to
believe.
ask.
In the trenches.
But then, separate from that, we also come as the speakers and give the presentation. We've done that for a lot of atheist groups and a handful of church groups, but that's a different event, right? So what we did for 2 years as intelligence gathering, and still do, we did it last weekend, is we go to the website of a church that we haven't been to. We find an invitation. Everyone's welcome. Here's our Sunday school classes. Visitors welcome. So, and the first
You're like vampires. You gotta wait to be invited.
no,
Yeah,
but they
you have to
always
be
invite us.
invited in, right?
They always invite us, right? Unless it's like Jehovah's Witnesses, they always invite you. We even crashed Mormon Sunday school, and so we just show up. And when we show up to Sunday school class, we talk to them about. We're wearing suits, we're carrying Bibles, whatever they're talking about, we'll just join the conversation, and then
It's always Paul, by the way.
it's always
It's
Paul.
always fun.
We wanted to do two things. We want them to like us. We want to be good ambassadors for free thought, but we also want them to know that we're atheists because in these two goals, the one can destroy the other, right? If you walk in and say I'm an atheist, they'll never like you. If you just want them to like you, you'll never tell them you're an atheist. But we want to do both. So usually at about 10 or 15 minutes into an hour-long class, one of us will just chime in on the topic. Well, when I read this passage as an atheist, I think, and so we'll just drop the A word very casually. We don't want to rip our shirt open and say, we're atheists, and we want to normalize. This is about normalizing atheism,
Rex
right?
tried that a couple of times.
No,
It was
no.
embarrassing. We had to not.
So-
Rex, no more shirt tearing.
But so then what happens, right? There's 45 minutes left. They're experiencing...
Carry on.
Just drinking it.
He gets all wound up.
They're experiencing cognitive dissonance because they just liked us
Feeling. They
30
get
seconds
happy,
ago, and now they
yeah.
know we're atheists.
Let me just pause button you real quick.
Sure.
Courtney and I, with a couple members of the Metroplex Atheists, have done similar things at churches. Maybe what?
Oh
4 times
yeah,
now?
with the
It's
Watchmen.
the funniest
With the
thing.
Watchmen Fellowship.
It's the funniest thing, the meet and greet beforehand, and they know there's atheists in the room, and they see me and Mark, these pudgy white guys with the goatees, and they spot us as atheists right away because we look the type, right? But they see Courtney in there, they think she's just part of the congregation, and she's a pretty little Courtney. And then when they call for the atheist to come up on the stage and sit down, and she sits down, the look on their faces is priceless. They're like,
really
oh, I've been talking to her for 10 minutes and thinking, and they had no idea.
And I'm nice,
Yep.
like I don't come off as
I like them.
as that stereotype in
Right.
your head.
He's the firebrand. I've gotten mellowed out. in my
And what
religion.
is interesting is even after the talk, even after I'm talking to them for a while, they're very fascinated by the fact that I'm a former believer and that I had a legitimate kind of deconversion and that it meant something to me. That I wasn't mistreated by Christianity.
Right.
And
You
I
weren't
didn't-
mad at God.
Right,
Right, yeah.
and there was never a point. And how the way that I phrase it is that I lost my ability to keep my faith. It's not. It was meaningful
couldn't,
to me.
yeah.
I loved
Yeah.
it, and I was not
It
mistreated
sounds
by
like
it.
you're channeling our presentation.
Right.
What
Well,
about-
yeah, and so
Nice.
but it still didn't hold water for me, and that I started to value what was actually true and not what meant something to me and what I was taught traditionally. So it's really interesting to have women especially come up to me and say, I never would have thought you would have been one of the atheists, and I love bringing.
I have a
You're
question
so
for you. I have a
nice.
question
Yeah.
for Courtney then. Do you
Yeah.
think, so I kind of have a certain belief on this. Do you think that people choose what they believe? Do you think it's a choice? Do you think it's free will or you will
boy.
what
You
you
were about to
believe?
get Rex wound up here.
Well,
It doesn't take much.
I don't
There's
think
a lot of-
you do. I don't think that it's a choice, but
From what I know, my degree is in psychology, and I nerd out on it with Sam Harris and stuff.
yeah,
From what I understand, the science to point to,
I don't think it is either. but,
it's
yeah.
it's not who we are is a result of our genetics and our experience
Right.
and our brain pattern, and whatever situation we're put in, no matter how many
You
times
follow.
no matter how many times we rerun it, we would still behave the same way
Yeah.
because our genetics and our past experience
So you
brought
hold
us
a
to that point.
determinism?
So, what?
Like you hold a determinism then?
Well,
Like,
it depends on how you define that, because determinism could mean, people think of it as like a fate sort of thing, where it's outside of you. I don't think that that's the case. I think
No,
that
it's
it's
just
a matter
intrinsically-
of chance, but
Yeah.
when we decide that is not predetermined, but it's consistent, because
yeah.
it's, and we're constantly changing and evolving every day through our new experiences, and our brains our brains actually shift their shape, and they move, and we get more
Neural
grooves.
pathways change.
Yeah, and more if we pick up an instrument and play it for 6 months, our brain looks different, and it's and our other abilities are different, and so it's really incredible the plasticity of our brain. And that big question of brain scans, is the brain looking the way it is because of our behavior, or is our behavior because of the way that our brain looks? And it's it's an open question. But so to answer your question though,
Do you think we choose what we believe?
I don't think that you can will yourself to believe something
I
that you don't.
The criteria for which you believe things.
So
I think you can change that, but I don't think you can change what you believe.
What I was gonna say is if you don't believe something, you can't make yourself believe that.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you have a sufficient motivation to still believe something, then that goes into cognitive dissonance,
Yeah.
because you don't actually
Yeah.
believe it. So you
Like
don't
I
really
couldn't
believe
stand
it.
at the edge of
But-
a
but
building
you
and
can-
say,
But you
jump
can
off
believe,
this building and you'll fly.
Right,
Like
but-
I couldn't make
right,
you believe that.
but you
Yeah.
can believe that you believe it.
Let me just chime in real quick,
Yeah.
Courtney.
You can
and
think
let-
that you do.
Let Rex and Owen, but at the Q&A at a church once, someone asked that similar thing, and I had a black coffee mug,
Yeah.
and remember, yeah, you were there. I said, okay, I want you for 30 seconds to believe that this coffee mug is red. Can you do that? And he said, yeah. And I was like, okay, and I set my clock.
Well, but he
I set my
probably
watch.
didn't really realize what you meant. Like, he
No,
didn't
I
actually-
even prefaced it. I even said, I want you to truly believe that you can do that? And I did not expect him to say yes. And he said, yeah, and so I set my watch for 30 seconds, and we sat there. And then at the end, I said, okay, was that coffee mug red? Yes, it was. And is it black now? Yes. Really? And
I think that's. I
You
think
can't-
that's
I don't think
dishonest.
that was a good analogy.
I think it's
but
dishonest.
belief is
No.
not a
Person's
choice,
part.
it's a realization.
It's
Anyway.
it's a result. So
Yeah.
so
But
I
you
have.
can only make that example through that demonstration with someone who's willing to go with you on that journey.
Yeah.
I think he was just
Self-deceive.
kind of-
Yeah.
I've had several Christians in my home recently who had this exact same conversation, and I like to say, hey, give me your best shot. If I'm wrong about the Bible
Convince
or
me.
about Jesus, I
Yeah.
want you to convince me.
Based on
I don't want to be
evidence,
wrong,
right?
right?
Yeah.
If you're right and I'm wrong, and I'll extend that possibility, then convince me. And they usually throw at you some version of Pascal's wager, right? And that's
What if
probably
you're wrong?
So Pascal's wrong on a lot of levels, but I like to zoom in on this one. I say, okay, I'll take you up on that. I'll take you up on Pascal's wager. Now, how exactly do I do this? How exactly do I choose to believe? Because that's really what Pascal's asking to do, right? And I
He's
say,
saying fake it,
right,
just in
so I'm
case.
saying,
That's what he's saying.
well, but that's not the same as believing, right? So if there's an all-knowing God, he'll know I don't
Yeah,
actually
he
believe.
knows that you're not going to be
And
able to fool
so
him.
I can pretend to believe. I can go through the motions. I could tell my mother I believe, but that's not the same as actually believing, right? And I think that a lot of what's going on here is the theater. It's the pretending to believe.
So maybe a step too far. So this is such a nuanced set of questions. It is conceivable to me that people have a motivation to set doubts aside.
Yes.
Okay, to profess a belief
Yes.
and to table the doubts and the dissonance. But I tend to agree with you on everything else. I think that motivation doesn't affect the conclusion you reach, it affects your dealing with the dissonance and the doubts.
Well, and also,
Yeah.
That's a nuance, right? That's
yeah, also to kind of like continue that, you can have a motivation toward other things, and not everybody cares as much about the truthfulness of it, and they care about the happiness they gain from it in the community and the tradition.
Sure.
And so a lot of believers, they don't mind that, they don't want to think about it, and they may not really investigate it, because you only get
Such a
to
good
this
point.
yeah, you may only get to this point of where we are, of where we're intellectually thinking about the truthfulness of it, because we care about whether it's actually accurate. And
That's
so
true.
a lot
Amen.
of people don't do
Right,
that.
that's so.
And actually, this is the disruptor function that Owen and I are often playing in these Sunday school
Very good.
classes. We walk into Sunday school, and all we have to do is ask questions. We're not even saying anything about our beliefs. It's
a volume.
asking the questions. And when we, and we're talking about people that have been in Sunday school together for 20 years. Owen and I are often the youngest ones in the room. And so we will say, well, what do you know, hey, this is the first time I've been to a Lutheran church, or I'm not really familiar with the Methodist. Tell me, what do you believe about the resurrection of Jesus? Was this a physical act? Or what do you really believe about the afterlife? What happens? Or what do you really believe about the creation account in Genesis? If I'll start asking these questions, I will often find the people in the room looking at each other and they don't agree. And they don't know they don't agree because they never talk about it either. They talk
For 20
about
years, they've never had a conversation.
they
with
talk
us
about
about
who's
that.
bringing salad next week for potluck
Mind
and,
blown.
and who's bringing sandwiches.
And-
This gets us to
and
a-
yeah, and they listen to the sermon about a specific verse.
Right, let me interject real quick. When we talk about the 5 claims, and it's in both presentations, in the first presentation we do, we talk about the project, and the second we talk about the 5 claims. We have some other presentations we do. When we talk about the 5 claims,
So, why don't you actually talk about something
I
else?
don't know what you're referring to.
when we basically congealed the justifications that we would get from a Christian about why they believe fall into 5 different categories. And the first 2 categories sort of are tied together, and they're basically truth claims, and then the last 3 are subjective. The first 2 reasons, but I'll start with the first one. When you ask a Christian, why are you a Christian? And the first answer is the myth and magic, right? God is real, miracles are real, there are angels,
It's
there are
the
demons.
supernatural stuff.
There is a supernatural domain around us that we can't see and that we can't really interact with directly, but that can influence us. That magical thinking, right, is the top line reason.
Well, and then when pressed for any evidence for any of that,
Gets us to point 2.
it gets us to point 2, which is the Bible's a divine perfect book. You wouldn't, if there were physical evidence for any of the magic claims, you wouldn't need the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But because they don't have anything they can produce for the claim that Jesus rose from
The
the
circular
grave, or the
logic
claim that the
concept, right.
earth was created 6,000 years ago, or the claim that you get to live
I
after
have
you
a
take
book
your
that
last
tells
breath.
me
I have a book
Right.
that tells me, right? So
Right.
that's
How do you know that book
that's
is
their
true?
fallback,
Right.
And so these are objective truth claims, and then the third one, as you move to the more liberal denominations, if you move like to the Methodists, which are kind of in the middle of this spectrum, right? Then they don't talk so much about the myth and miracle. They start talking about, well, the plan is beautiful, right? It's
Jesus'
we love
sacrifice.
this.
Right.
It's
For
this
God so loved
expression
the
of
world.
love, right?
Right.
Like parables, I
it-
guess?
And then finally they'll move on to, well, okay, it's good for the world, right? We need this.
Good human values have to come from
you
Christianity, they can't come from somewhere else.
You wouldn't know how to be a good person without this.
Yeah.
We would have never built a hospital without this. We'd all just be slaughtering each other.
So
without
much apologetics falls under Christianity.
I
Is
love
very
the wording of your counterpoint.
it is.
Yeah, the counterpoints are actually, they should be saying.
This
counterpoints,
is
dude.
progressively painting them into a corner.
Let's-
Right.
See,
And so
You guys explain
the very
counterpoint
last
for each
claim,
one?
and so the very last claim we get is even from people that don't even believe
Like,
in the
can have
miracle,
any
who will concede it might be false, who will concede that Jesus was just a man. The very last toehold is life without Christianity would be meaningless and hopeless. We gotta have
Meaning.
this,
Where do we
even
get
if
it
it's
from?
even if it's
Right.
just made up, right? So in terms of listening to what Christians tell us for over 2 years now, we've distilled it down to these 5 things, and it's from the most fundamentalist to the most liberal. So the burden of proof would be on the believer, right?
Well, of course. They're making the claim.
If you tell me that you had Cheerios for breakfast, that's a mundane claim. I'll accept your testimony.
Right, because there's no consequence.
If you
There's no
tell me
consequence
that your
to
grandmother
believing.
rose from the grave 3 days after you buried her, I'm going to need more evidence
Huge
for that claim.
consequence.
This
Right.
goes back, I mean,
Right.
it clearly goes back to Carl Sagan, the more extraordinary the claim, the more extraordinary the evidence
Right.
needs to be. It is very unremarkable to find that there was a guy named Pilate who was the Roman procurator,
Right.
and we have coins that prove that.
We know this to be true.
We know that to be true. We have documents written by the emperors in their own hand. Like there is very little to cause me to have any motivation to doubt. Okay, but if you say something like a Jewish Messiah in the first century after being crucified literally rose up from his grave, that's something that we've never experienced in real life.
Yes.
Right?
Every mammal we've ever seen die stays dead.
Stays dead. Now there are some modern science around people that get revived with the shockers, with the defibrillators. We're talking about it in a time before modern medicine, and the evidence required to accept that claim is needs to be as extraordinary as the claim itself. But when we get down to the evidence that is almost always provided, I have a first-person account. What we find is the Bible is not divine, is not inspired.
The Bible is obviously man-made.
Man-made. It is obviously man-made.
A product of its time, its place.
Right, of its own culture. And when you look at it objectively, there's no doubt in my mind that the Bible is a man-made document.
Right.
There was
It
no
took
divine
centuries
influence.
to even figure out what it was.
Right.
It doesn't agree internally. It doesn't agree with history. I mean, there are a few moments where you would expect the Bible to be locked into history, and it's just not. I mean, Luke tells us this story of Joseph and Mary having to go to Bethlehem to have the baby because it's this worldwide census and the Caesar has ordered everyone to return to their ancestral homeland. Well, there's just no record of this. This would have been a huge empire-wide event, and it never happened. So this is clearly, not even bound to history. It's a myth made much later.
Let me throw out an objection at you that I've heard. Socrates, there's no first-hand account that he ever existed. We have nothing written, no autographs written by Socrates. All we have is what Plato and Aristotle have said about him.
Sure.
That's an objection I've heard. How would you counter that?
I would say they may be right. I mean, there may have been no Socrates.
Do you think that Socrates existed?
I think it is a reasonable conclusion that he did. We haven't seen Plato lie about
But if we
other teachers.
but if we heard that Socrates' mother was a virgin when he was born, and then after he died he rose from the grave,
Great
I would say there's no evidence for those
There's
claims.
no. What I was going to say though is it doesn't matter whether Socrates existed or not. What we have
Was he magic?
No, yeah, that, and it matters what followed
The
from
claims.
his teachings.
Well, so if his students said, if the
We know
students of
that
Socrates said, hey, our teacher was named Socrates and he taught us these things and we're going to teach them to you.
Exactly.
Well, if
That's all that
they were
matters.
lying and they made up those ideas themselves, so be it.
It doesn't
There's no
matter,
magic
right?
in
Because
that.
they're still they still are
Well,
extant.
and the value of it stands on its
Right.
own merit.
Yeah, it stands on the value of his
And I would
teachings stands on
say-
their own merits. You're right, exactly.
But this, we'd be really,
Supernatural claims.
it'd be,
Right.
it'd
Like
be
the
really
supernatural-
different.
Well, and so
just
this wording is carefully made. We don't say, when they say the Bible's a divine perfect book, we don't say, no, the Bible is clearly wrong on every point.
No.
That's what the apologists would love for us to say, and they can come back and say, oh no, look at all these things the Bible got right.
Right.
I say, the Bible is obviously man-made. You know what? Where that puts the Bible on the shelf with every other book ever written? On the same shelf. All books
Exactly.
are man-made. So if the Bible is man-made and it contains some accurate history, and the Romans really did occupy Palestine in the first century, and they really did crucify a lot of people for insurrection, and there really was a governor named Pilate, those are mundane claims, right? The fact that a book written in the
It's
first
the
century
supernatural
would get
claims.
that right is not a problem.
There's nothing extraordinary about that.
But the fact that this book could be evidence for the miraculous, that's the problem. If it's merely a man-made book, it is insufficient evidence for the miraculous.
Exactly.
Because anyone can write a book and make miraculous claims.
The third point that we come to, and so we're kind of quasi taking the role of apologist to sort of explain our counterpoint. But the idea that God's plans are beautiful, that you hear somewhat liberal Christians say that the sacrifice Jesus made is the most beautiful act, right? It's the greatest story ever told. There was even a movie about it. The problem is, you look at that, but you also actually look at Yahweh, the character of the Old Testament, and let's take a step back from it, consider the concept of the Trinity. The same God in Leviticus that's giving instructions to the Israelites about how to go obtain Jews in Leviticus 20.
Or slaves, yeah.
Right, I'm sorry, go obtain slaves. The same God that drowned everyone, saved 6 people in the world with a flood, right?
Murdered the Egyptian firstborn.
Murdered the Egyptian
yeah.
firstborn. That same deity is Jesus, the Prince of Peace. And there is a significant contradiction. And one of the things I say when we give the presentation is there is an extremely good book by Bart Ehrman called Lost Christianities that talks about all of the different flavors of what Christianity was in the first couple of centuries. I really encourage everybody to go read that. It's an extraordinarily good book. The point is that God himself in the Old Testament is a really awful, horrible, vindictive, spiteful guy. He's everything that Richard Dawkins says he is when he talks about him being the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. And the substitutionary human sacrifice in order to forgive.
It's such a primitive.
Vicarious redemption.
It is so clearly ripped out of pagan thinking. You look at the world that existed when Christianity was kind of developing and this Christology was evolving, and you look at the kinds of things pagans would have said,